The severed head of a Spanish conquistador rolled across the stone courtyard of Cusco in 1533. The Inca ruler Manco Inca had ordered this brutal execution as revenge for the death of his brother, but this moment revealed something deeper than simple vengeance. It showed how the Inca legal system worked differently than anything Europeans had ever seen. The Incas had created a society where justice meant something very different from what the Spanish understood. This story of punishment and justice in the Inca Empire holds secrets that still surprise historians today. The Inca Empire stretched over 2,500 miles along the Andes Mountains when Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1532. This massive civilization ruled over millions of people without written laws or formal courts. Yet somehow, they maintained order across their vast territory. How did they do it? The answer lies in understanding their unique approach to justice and punishment. Most people think ancient civilizations used harsh punishments to control their people. They imagine brutal executions and torture devices, but the Incas created a different kind of system. Their approach to justice focused more on restoring balance than on revenge. This made their legal code one of the most interesting in human history. The Inca legal system began with the Sapa Inca, the emperor who ruled from Cusco. He was considered a god king, the son of the sun god Inti. This divine status gave him absolute power over all legal matters, but he did not make decisions alone. A complex network of officials helped him govern the empire's justice system. These officials were called caracas. They served as local judges and administrators. Each caraca ruled over a group of about 1,000 families. They handled most day-to-day legal problems. Only the most serious cases reached the Sapa Inca himself. This system allowed the empire to function efficiently despite its enormous size. The Inca legal code covered many areas of life. It regulated marriage, property rights, trade, and religious practices. The code also established punishments for crimes like theft, murder, and rebellion. But these punishments were not random or cruel. They followed specific principles that reflected Inca values. One key principle was reciprocity. This meant that punishment should fit the crime exactly. If someone stole food, they had to return food of equal value. If they damaged property, they had to repair or replace it. This system focused on making things right rather than on hurting the criminal. Another important principle was community responsibility. The Incas believed that crimes affected the entire community, not just the victim. This system encouraged people to watch out for one another and prevent crime. The Incas also believed in rehabilitation over punishment. Most criminals were not executed or imprisoned. Instead, they were given chances to make amends and become productive members of society again. This approach was very different from European systems of the time. Capital punishment existed in the Inca legal system, but it was rare. The death penalty was reserved for the most serious crimes, like treason, murder, and witchcraft. Even then, the Incas preferred to execute only the guilty person, not their entire family. This was unusual compared to other ancient civilizations. Execution methods in the Inca Empire were designed to send clear messages to society. Common methods included strangulation, clubbing, and throwing criminals off cliffs. These executions were public events meant to deter others from committing similar crimes, but they were also performed with specific religious ceremonies. The choice of execution method often depended on the nature of the crime. Thieves might be strangled, while traitors were often thrown from high cliffs. Murderers might be clubbed to death in public ceremonies. Each method carried symbolic meaning that reinforced social values and religious beliefs. The Incas had special laws for different social classes. Nobles, commoners, and slaves all faced different rules and punishments. This might seem unfair by modern standards, but within their own system, it made sense. The Incas believed that people with higher status had greater responsibilities and should face harsher punishments for breaking the law. Nobles who committed crimes faced more severe punishments than commoners for the same offenses. This reflected their privileged position and the greater damage their crimes could cause to society. However, nobles also had more rights and protections under the law. Commoners had fewer rights than nobles, but more than slaves. They could own property, marry freely, and participate in community decisions. Their legal obligations included military service, tax payments, and community labor projects. Slaves existed in Inca society, but had more rights than slaves in other civilizations. They could own property, marry, and even buy their flight freedom. Slave owners were required to treat their slaves fairly and could be punished for cruelty. This made slavery less harsh than in many other societies. Marriage and family law were central to Inca justice. The legal system regulated who could marry whom and how property passed between generations. Marriage was not just a personal choice, but a matter of state policy. The Incas encouraged people to marry within their social class and geographic region. Marriage required approval from local officials, and sometimes the Sapa Inca himself. Divorce was possible, but required legal proceedings. Adultery was punished severely, especially for women. Men who committed adultery faced fines, while women could be executed. Inheritance laws were complex and varied by social class. Noble families had strict rules about succession and property division. Common families had more flexibility, but still had to follow basic legal principles. Property usually passed from father to son, but daughters could inherit in some circumstances. Children were treated differently under the law than adults. Young criminals were usually given lighter punishments and chances to reform. The Incas believed that children could be taught proper behavior through education and guidance rather than harsh punishment. Property rights were strictly protected under Inca law. The empire had a complex system of land ownership that balanced individual and community needs. Each family had the right to farm specific plots of land, but they also had obligations to contribute to community projects and support the army. Land could not be sold or transferred freely. It was assigned by the state and passed down through families. This system ensured that everyone had access to land while preventing the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. The legal system also regulated the production and distribution of goods. The Incas controlled the manufacture of textiles, metalwork, and other important items. Quality standards were enforced, and violations could result in severe punishments. Trade and commerce were heavily regulated by the legal system. The Incas controlled the production and distribution of goods throughout their empire. Merchants had to follow strict rules about pricing, quality, and fair dealing. Violations could result in severe punishments, including death. Religious crimes were taken very seriously in Inca society. Blasphemy, heresy, and failure to participate in religious ceremonies could all result in execution. The Incas saw religion as the foundation of their entire civilization. Attacks on religious beliefs were viewed as threats to the state itself. Priests and religious officials had their own legal system, separate from regular courts. They were judged by religious tribunals according to sacred law. Their punishments could include death, exile, or removal from office. This maintained the independence of the religious hierarchy. The legal system also regulated religious practices and ceremonies. Participation in state-sponsored religious events was mandatory. Failure to attend could result in fines or other punishments. This ensured that religious unity was maintained throughout the empire. The legal system also regulated military service and conduct. All able-bodied men were required to serve in the army when called. Desertion, cowardice, and insubordination were capital offenses. But soldiers who showed bravery and loyalty were rewarded with land, titles, and honors. Military tribunals handled cases involving soldiers and military personnel. These courts had special procedures and punishments designed for military situations. Officers who failed in their duties could be demoted or executed. The legal system also regulated the treatment of prisoners of war. Enemy soldiers were usually incorporated into the Inca army or used for public works projects. This policy helped expand the empire while reducing the cost of maintaining prisoners. Women had specific legal rights and protections under Inca law. They could own property, run businesses, and inherit from their parents. However, they also faced harsher punishments for certain crimes, like adultery. The legal system tried to balance women's rights with social stability. Marriage laws gave women some protection against abuse and abandonment. Husbands who mistreated their wives could be punished. Women could initiate divorce proceedings in some circumstances, but women also had fewer legal rights than men in most situations. Women played important roles in religious and economic life. Priestesses held significant power in religious ceremonies. Female artisans produced high-quality textiles and crafts. But political power was generally reserved for men. The legal system included special provisions for people with disabilities. Blind people, cripples, and mentally ill individuals were not punished for crimes they committed. Instead, they were cared for by their families or the community. This showed the Incas' understanding of fairness and human dignity. The legal system had no written code. Laws were passed down through oral tradition and memorized by officials. This might seem primitive, but it actually worked well for their society. Officials were trained from childhood to remember thousands of legal precedents and rulings. Legal decisions were made through a process called trial by ordeal in some cases. This meant that guilt or innocence was determined through supernatural signs. For example, a person might be forced to drink poison. If they survived, they were innocent. If they died, they were guilty. This system relied on religious beliefs rather than evidence. Appeals were possible in the Inca legal system. People could appeal decisions to higher officials or even to the Sapa Inca himself. But appeals had to be based on procedural errors or new evidence. Simply disagreeing with a decision was not enough grounds for appeal. The legal system also included provisions for pardons and mercy. The Sapa Inca could pardon criminals for political or religious reasons. Pardons were often granted during religious festivals or after military victories. This gave the emperor a way to show mercy and strengthen his popularity. Evidence and testimony were important parts of Inca trials. Witnesses were required to swear oaths on sacred objects. Lying under oath was a serious crime that could result in execution. This encouraged people to tell the truth in court proceedings. Punishment was often carried out by the victim's family in serious cases. This gave victims' families a chance for personal revenge while still maintaining some legal oversight. The state could approve or modify the punishment to ensure it was appropriate. The Inca legal system included special courts for different types of cases. Religious crimes went to religious courts. Military crimes went to military tribunals. Civil disputes were handled by local officials. This specialization made the system more efficient and fair. Prisons existed in the Inca Empire, but were used differently than in Europe. They were mainly used to hold people until trial or execution. Long-term imprisonment was rare. Most criminals were either released after paying fines or executed quickly. Labor service was a common punishment for minor crimes. Criminals might be required to work on public projects like roads or temples. This served both as punishment and as a way to benefit society. The work was often hard but not usually dangerous. Exile was another common punishment in the Inca legal system. Serious criminals might be sent away from their communities to remote areas. This removed dangerous people from society while avoiding the cost of execution or imprisonment. The Inca legal system had special protections for travelers and merchants. Robbery of travelers was punished more severely than ordinary theft. This encouraged trade and travel throughout the empire. The famous Inca roads were kept safe by these strict laws. Property crimes were punished based on the value of what was stolen. Stealing a small amount of food might result in community service. Stealing valuable items like gold or silver could result in death. This proportional system made punishments fit the crime. Violent crimes received harsher punishments than property crimes. Murder was usually punished by death. Assault and battery were punished by fines or labor service. Rape was punished severely, especially if the victim was a noble woman. The legal system had special rules for nobles and royal family members. They faced harsher punishments for the same crimes committed by commoners. This reflected their higher status and greater responsibility to the empire. royal family members could be executed for crimes that would only result in fines for commoners. Religious officials had their own legal system separate from the regular courts. Priests and priestesses were judged by religious courts according to religious law. Their punishments could include death, exile, or removal from office. This maintained the independence of the religious hierarchy. The Inca legal system included provisions for emergency situations. During wars, natural disasters, or rebellions, normal legal procedures could be suspended. Emergency powers were given to military commanders and local officials. This allowed quick action when normal procedures were too slow. The arrival of Spanish conquistadors in 1532 created a crisis for the Inca legal system. The Spanish brought their own laws and courts which conflicted with Inca traditions. This created confusion and conflict that weakened the empire's ability to respond to the invasion. Spanish chroniclers left detailed accounts of the Inca legal system. These sources are valuable but must be interpreted carefully. The Spanish often misunderstood or misrepresented Inca practices to justify their conquest. Modern historians must separate fact from Spanish bias. Archaeological evidence supports many of the Spanish accounts of Inca justice. Excavations have found evidence of Inca prisons, execution sites, and administrative buildings. These discoveries help confirm the accuracy of historical records and fill in the gaps in our knowledge. Excavations at Cusco have revealed the foundations of administrative buildings where legal decisions were made. Evidence of prisons and holding areas has been found throughout the empire. These discoveries help us understand how the legal system actually functioned. The Inca legal system influenced later colonial and modern legal systems in South America. Many Inca principles were incorporated into Spanish colonial law. Some of these principles still exist in modern Andean legal traditions. This shows the lasting impact of Inca justice. Spanish colonizers found the Inca legal system both fascinating and threatening. They admired its efficiency but feared its potential for organizing resistance. This led to a complex process of adaptation and suppression that shaped colonial law throughout the region. Modern indigenous communities in the Andes still practice some traditional legal customs. These include community-based justice, restorative rather than punitive approaches, and collective responsibility. These practices may be survivals of the ancient Inca legal system. Ethnographic studies have documented these continuing traditions among Quechua and Aymara communities. These studies show how ancient legal principles have been adapted to modern circumstances while maintaining their essential character. The Inca approach to justice offers lessons from modern legal systems. Their focus on restoration rather than punishment, community involvement, and proportional responses to crime has influenced modern restorative justice movements. This shows that ancient wisdom can still be relevant today. Restorative justice programs in modern courts often use principles that can be traced back to Inca legal practices. These programs focus on repairing harm rather than punishing offenders. They involve the community in the justice process and emphasize rehabilitation over retribution. Comparing Inca justice to other ancient legal systems reveals both similarities and differences. Like other civilizations, the Incas used harsh punishments for serious crimes, but their emphasis on community responsibility and restoration was unusual. This made their system unique among ancient civilizations. Babylonian, Egyptian, and Roman legal systems all influenced later Western law, but the Inca system developed independently and reached different conclusions about how to organize justice. This makes it particularly valuable for comparative legal studies. The collapse of the Inca Empire meant that their legal system was never fully recorded or preserved. Much of what we know comes from fragmentary sources and archaeological evidence. This makes it difficult to fully understand how the system actually worked in practice. Modern scholars continued to debate many aspects of Inca justice. Questions remain about how the system was actually administered, how consistent it was across the empire, and how it evolved over time. New archaeological discoveries continue to provide fresh insights into these questions. The story of Inca justice is not just about ancient history. It tells us about human creativity in solving social problems. It shows how different societies can develop very different approaches to the same basic challenges. And it reminds us that there are many ways to think about fairness and justice. Anthropologists and legal scholars continue to study Inca justice as a model for alternative approaches to law. Their research contributes to ongoing debates about criminal justice reform and community-based legal systems. The Incas created a legal system that worked for their specific society and circumstances. It was not perfect, and it would not work in modern contexts, but it was effective for maintaining order and justice in their world. Understanding this system helps us appreciate the diversity of human legal traditions. The Inca approach to justice emphasized harmony between individuals and the community. This was very different from the individualistic approach that dominates Western legal systems. Understanding this difference helps us see how cultural values shape legal institutions. The contrast between Inca and Spanish legal systems highlights important differences in cultural values. The Spanish focused on individual guilt and punishment. The Incas emphasized community harmony and restoration. These different approaches reflected deeper philosophical differences between the two civilizations. Spanish legal procedures were based on written law and formal courts. Inca procedures relied on oral tradition and community involvement. These different foundations created very different experiences of justice for ordinary people. The ultimate failure of the Inca legal system came not from its internal weaknesses, but from external conquest. The Spanish imposed their own legal system and destroyed Inca institutions. This shows how legal systems depend on political power for their survival. The Spanish systematically dismantled Inca administrative structures. They replaced curacas with Spanish officials. They banned traditional religious practices and legal procedures. This process took decades, but was ultimately successful in eliminating Inca legal traditions. Today, the legacy of Inca justice lives on in various ways. Modern indigenous movements in South America draw inspiration from traditional legal practices. Academic interest in alternative approaches to justice continues to grow. And the story of Inca law remains a fascinating chapter in human legal history. Some indigenous communities have successfully revived traditional legal practices. These efforts show that ancient legal traditions can be adapted to modern circumstances while maintaining their essential character. The Incas proved that complex societies can function without written laws or formal courts. They showed that justice can be based on community values rather than abstract principles. And they demonstrated that punishment is not the only way to maintain social order. Their story challenges modern assumptions about what legal systems must look like. They offer us one fascinating example of how creative human beings can be when faced with complex social challenges. The story of Inca justice ultimately tells us about human ingenuity and adaptability. Faced with the challenge of governing millions of people across difficult terrain, the Incas developed a unique solution. Their legal system was perfectly suited to their society and their environment. This achievement reminds us that human beings are remarkably creative when it comes to solving social problems. The Incas developed sophisticated legal institutions without benefit of writing or formal education. Their success shows what is possible when people work together toward common goals. The story also reminds us of the fragility of human achievements. The magnificent Inca Empire, with all its sophisticated institutions and impressive accomplishments, was swept away in just a few decades. This shows how quickly even the most successful civilizations can disappear. But it also shows how some ideas and practices can survive even when the societies that created them are gone. Elements of Inca justice live on in modern indigenous communities. Principles of restorative justice echo Inca approaches to crime and punishment. The ongoing discovery and interpretation of Inca legal practices keeps the story alive and relevant. Each new piece of evidence adds to our understanding of how human beings have tried to create fair and just societies. The Incas remind us that these efforts are both ancient and universal. Archaeological excavations continue to uncover new evidence of Inca legal institutions. These discoveries help fill in gaps in our knowledge and correct misconceptions about how the system actually worked. The story of Inca justice is ultimately about human creativity and resilience. It shows us how people can solve complex social problems using the resources available to them. And it demonstrates that different cultures can arrive at very different solutions to the same fundamental problems. Perhaps most importantly, the story of Inca justice reminds us that our own legal systems are not the only possible way to organize society. They are products of specific historical circumstances and cultural values. Other societies have developed different approaches that worked well for them. This realization should make us more humble about our own legal traditions and more curious about alternatives. The Incas offer us one window into different ways of thinking about justice and punishment. Their example challenges us to think more deeply about what we really want from our own legal systems. The story continues today in the struggles of indigenous peoples to maintain their traditional legal practices. It continues in academic debates about restorative versus punitive justice. And it continues in the ongoing human effort to create fair and effective systems of law.